Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is not just about Russia or Ukraine. It is about Europe itself, its future security, and a growing fear shared quietly in capitals from Berlin to Warsaw, from Paris to the Baltic states. Vladimir Putin is now openly accused by Western intelligence agencies, European leaders, and security experts of something far bigger than a regional war. They say Russia is exporting chaos, deliberately spreading instability far beyond the battlefield, and Europe is bracing for the consequences. This is the real condition of the Russia-Ukraine war today, not frozen, not ending, but expanding in impact, influence, and danger. The phrase exporting chaos may sound dramatic, but for Europe, it describes a pattern that has become impossible to ignore. The war in Ukraine is no longer only about territory or military lines on a map. It has transformed into a multi-layered conflict involving cyber attacks, energy pressure, political interference, migrant crises, sabotage, and the constant threat of escalation. And Europe is now on the front line of this broader confrontation. To understand why European security fears are rising, we must first understand how the war has evolved. When Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, many in Europe believed the conflict would be short. Either Russia would win quickly, or diplomacy would force a settlement. Neither happened. Instead, the war hardened into a grinding, long-term struggle. Ukraine resisted, adapted, and survived with Western support. Russia failed to achieve its original goals, but refused to retreat. As the battlefield stalemated, Moscow changed tactics. Rather than focusing only on military victory in Ukraine, the Kremlin began applying pressure everywhere else. Energy became a weapon. Gas supplies were reduced or cut entirely. European economies, especially Germany and Central Europe, were shaken. Inflation surged. Public anger rose. Moscow understood that political instability inside Europe could weaken support for Ukraine. Then came cyber warfare. Government systems, hospitals, infrastructure networks, and media outlets across Europe faced an increase in cyber attacks traced back to Russian-linked groups. These were not random hacks. They targeted trust in elections, trust in public services, trust in democratic institutions. At the same time, European intelligence agencies noticed a rise in disinformation campaigns. Fake news stories spread online, often designed to inflame social divisions, amplify extremist voices, and portray Ukraine as corrupt or undeserving of support. The goal was not to convince everyone, only to confuse enough people to paralyze decision-making. This is what European officials mean when they say exporting chaos. The war also brought physical threats beyond Ukraine's borders. Critical infrastructure became a target. Undersea cables, energy pipelines, rail networks. While direct responsibility is often denied or impossible to prove publicly, European governments increasingly believe these acts are part of a broader strategy of intimidation and disruption. In the Baltic Sea, in particular, security officials are alarmed. NATO navies have increased patrols. Surveillance has intensified. The fear is not a single dramatic attack, but a slow erosion of safety, small incidents that test responses, probe weaknesses, and normalize instability. Meanwhile, on Ukraine's front lines, the war continues with brutal intensity. Eastern Ukraine remains a killing ground. Cities and towns are reduced to rubble. Russian forces push forward inch by inch, absorbing heavy losses. Ukraine strikes back with drones, missiles, and precision attacks deep into Russian-held territory. Neither side is close to a decisive breakthrough. This stalemate feeds the wider crisis. As long as the war drags on, Russia has incentives to keep Europe under pressure. And Europe, in turn, fears that supporting Ukraine indefinitely may invite even more retaliation. European leaders now face a painful dilemma. If they reduce support for Ukraine, they risk rewarding aggression and encouraging future wars. But if they continue strong support, they risk deeper confrontation with Russia economically, politically, and possibly militarily. This tension is shaping European politics. In several countries, elections have brought gains for parties skeptical of aiding Ukraine. These movements often argue that domestic problems should come first, that energy prices and migration matter more than a distant war. European intelligence agencies warn that Russian influence operations actively support these narratives. The fear is not that democracy will collapse overnight, but that unity will fracture slowly. NATO, once seen as a defensive alliance, is now preparing for a long era of confrontation. Military spending across Europe has surged. Countries that once hesitated to invest in defense are rebuilding armies, purchasing air defense systems, and expanding ammunition production. Finland and Sweden's decisions to join NATO reflect a deep shift in European thinking. Neutrality no longer feels safe. At the heart of these fears lies one question: what does Russia want now? Many European analysts believe the Kremlin no longer expects a clear military victory in Ukraine. Instead, the goal may be endurance, outlasting Western support, exhausting Ukraine, and reshaping Europe's security order through pressure rather than conquest. From this perspective, exporting chaos is not a side effect of the war, it is the strategy. By keeping Europe anxious, divided, and economically strained, Moscow hopes to weaken the coalition backing Ukraine. Even small cracks can have large effects over time: a delayed weapons shipment, a hesitant vote in parliament, a government falling under public pressure. Each moment of hesitation matters, yet Europe is not passive. In response to these threats, European security coordination has deepened. Intelligence sharing has expanded. Cyber defense units now operate around the clock. Counter-disinformation efforts are stronger, though still struggling against the speed of social media. Energy systems have been diversified to reduce dependence on Russian supplies. Perhaps most importantly, Europe has begun to think long-term. Leaders increasingly accept that the relationship with Russia has fundamentally changed. Even if the war in Ukraine ended tomorrow, trust would not return quickly. The idea of Russia as a partner in European security has collapsed. What replaces it is a cold, cautious stance focused on deterrence and resilience. For ordinary Europeans, this shift is unsettling. For decades, war felt distant. Security was assumed. Now, defense briefings talk openly about sabotage, hybrid warfare, and the possibility of escalation. Civilians hear words once reserved for history books: mobilization, stockpiles, readiness. This psychological impact is part of the chaos being exported. Ukraine, meanwhile, remains at the center of everything. Its survival has become a symbol. If Ukraine falls, many Europeans fear it will signal that borders can be changed by force again. That security guarantees mean little. That power, not law, rules international affairs. This is why, despite fatigue and fear, support continues. But Ukraine itself is under immense strain. Manpower shortages, infrastructure damage, and constant pressure weigh heavily. Leaders in Kiev walk a tightrope, balancing the need to keep fighting with the need to keep allies engaged. Every decision is scrutinized, every setback amplified. Russia, for its part, continues to adapt. Its economy has adjusted to sanctions better than many expected, though at long-term cost. Its military relies increasingly on drones, missiles, and sheer numbers. and its messaging emphasizes resilience, portraying the war as a civilizational struggle against the West. This narrative resonates beyond Russia. In parts of the world skeptical of Western power, Moscow's framing finds sympathy. That global dimension worries European leaders who see the conflict shaping a new international order. As winter approaches each year, fears intensify. Energy security remains a sensitive issue. Although Europe has reduced reliance on Russian gas, prices remain volatile. Any disruption can ripple through economies, fueling political unrest. Russia knows this, and Europe knows that Russia knows. So, where does this leave European security today? It leaves it in a state of heightened alert, strategic uncertainty, and reluctant determination. Leaders no longer ask whether Russia is exporting chaos. They ask how to contain it. Containment, however, is expensive. It requires unity, patience, and public support over many years. It demands honest conversations with citizens about risks and sacrifices. And it requires avoiding mistakes that could trigger direct conflict. The danger is miscalculation, a cyber attack that goes too far, a strike that crosses an unspoken red line, a misunderstanding at sea or in the air. In such an environment, even small incidents carry heavy weight. This is why diplomatic channels, though limited, remain open. Europe wants deterrence without war, strength without escalation, support for Ukraine without direct confrontation. Whether this balance can be maintained is the central question of our time, for now one reality is clear. The Russia-Ukraine war is no longer just Ukraine's war. It is a test of Europe's resilience, unity, and security architecture. And as long as chaos continues to spill across borders, through energy shocks, cyber attacks, disinformation, and fear, European leaders will remain on edge. Putin may deny exporting chaos, but across Europe, the effects are being felt every day, and the outcome of this struggle will shape the continent for a generation.